Tonight we are going to start by looking at our Bible verse for this weekend, and it's taken from the book of Ephesians, chapter 4, verses 17 to 22. And it says, "With the Lord's authority I say this, live no longer as the Gentiles do, for they are hopelessly confused. Their minds are full of darkness. They wander far from the life God gives because they have closed their minds and hardened their hearts against Him. They have no sense of shame. They live for lustful pleasure and eagerly practice every kind of impurity." But that isn't what you've learned about Christ. Since you have heard about Jesus and have learned the truth that comes from Him, throw off your old sinful nature and your former way of life. Have any of you guys ever heard of the show called Juvies? No? Okay. Well, MTV did a show called Juvies, and it takes viewers behind the scenes at the court process as it follows teenagers who thought that they were committing relatively minor offenses, like running away or getting off track in life. And we're going to take a clip and see the trailer of that.
Video. Communicate.
Hi, this is Central. We have an officer bringing in one.
Unlock. Go up on the wall right here.
My name's Sarah, and I'm 16 years old. I'm here for running away. I don't think I'm a criminal. I don't think that I really did anything wrong. I'm hoping they just put me on, probation.
Don't get all your hopes up because you might not go home.
Okay, we're going to shackle you, and you're going to go up to the holding area waiting on your detention hearing.
Ma'am, are you able to take your daughter home with you today?
I want to, but
I'm looking for shoplifting.
I had drugs in the car.
Auto theft.
I stole chicken.
When do I get out?
You're going to have your hearing in a few days.
What were you thinking, fighting on the bus? Fighting is not the answer. The court will order that you remain detained at this detention center. You're not going home today. The court's going to order that you be released to the custody of your parents.
I'm gonna do my homework, and I'm gonna be an actual daughter, and not some kid staying in your house.
The judge did what I hoped she'd do, and it's going to be a lot better.
I want to get my diploma. I want to walk across the stage. I want to go to prom.
Do you have any questions?
One question. Can I give my mom a hug?
Go ahead.
If we take a look into the book of Ephesians, the Apostle Paul is writing it from a prison cell. But he didn't go to prison for the reasons that we end up in there today. He went to prison for preaching the gospel. He is writing to people for reasons that today we would end up in jail. Paul is writing to people like you and I who are part of the church. He is writing to church people who have no sense of shame, who live for lustful pleasure, and who eagerly practice every kind of impurity. You know, people who go to church on Sunday but need to go and have their sex on Monday, their drinks on Thirsty Thursday, and who live by the philosophy of YOLO, you only live once, every other day of the week. People living more like they went to hell on Sunday rather than church. In the video that we just saw, two things really stuck out to me. And the first one was when the girl said, "I don't believe I'm a criminal. I just ran away." How true is that for us? I mean, maybe we have never run away from home, but how many of us have run away from God? Ephesians 4:18 says, maybe their minds are full of darkness. Their minds are full of darkness. They wander far from the life God gives because they have closed their minds and hardened their hearts against them. Being young, we have this mindset that I only live once. I'm going to do what I want to do. YOLO, but we never take into account the price we are paying. We never realize that by doing these things, we are wandering away from God. Hence, we are running away. And most of the time, we don't even feel like we're wrong. Like the girl in the video. We never are taking into account the price we are paying for what we are doing. How many of you guys have ever heard of C.S. Lewis? He wrote The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. If you, okay. Well, C.S. Lewis wrote a book entitled Screwtape Letters that goes exactly along the lines of how Satan gets us to sin and how to do it so well that we eventually fall into the trap of sinning. And there's two characters in the book, and there's the mentor devil and there's his student. And the mentor devil is teaching his student how to get us to sin. And one quote the mentor devil says is, "Whatever their bodies do affects their souls." It's funny how mortals always picture us as putting things into their minds, where in reality, our best work is done by keeping things out. Essentially, keeping God out. The greatest trick Satan ever did was getting us to justify what we are doing is okay. Having sex on Monday is okay. Getting drunk on Thursday is okay. Gossiping is okay. You see, we end up believing the lie that we are living life to the fullest. We tell ourselves that we are getting experience, and you know what? Even if we're making mistakes, we're learning from them. How we are acting is okay because maybe in the back of our heads we're saying, nobody's perfect, and God is going to forgive me, and He's going to love me anyway. But listen, God's unconditional love for us is not the same as His unconditional approval for our actions. Amen. When we make these choices, are we actually ending up in a good place? Do you know what the funny thing about sin is? We feel like we are living, but we are actually dying. You see, sin entraps us, and it confuses us, and then it has us justify it. In the process of killing us, it is separating us from God. And while all this is happening, we are closing the walls in our mind to be smaller and smaller and smaller until we end up in our own prison cell because of the choices we have made. When Paul was writing the book of Ephesians, he wrote it in 60 AD, and that's a long time ago. But what was really interesting to me that stuck out was, what Paul was writing about in 60 AD is the same sins, the same temptations, and the same exact problems that the Ephesians were facing are the same exact ones we are facing in 2013. Nothing has changed about sin. That means our Christian response needs to be the same. When C.S. Lewis's character, the devil, said it, he said it best by saying our best work is done by keeping things out, by keeping God out. You see, we are filling our minds with so many different distractions that we are not even able to conceive the things of God. Verse 19 says, "They have no sense of shame. They live for lustful pleasure, and they eagerly practice every kind of impurity." You know, sometimes when we are running away, We get so far away, and for whatever reason, we take a step back. We just take a step back and we think, how did I get here? How did I get here? Friends, the safest route to death, the safest route to hell is the gradual one, where we do not even realize how we got to where we are. God is here to tell us that we do not need to go through these experiences to live life to the fullest, because it's time to wake up. Because by choosing those things, we are closing ourselves off from the ultimate experience, and that's God. The second thing about that video that really stood out to me was at the end when the girl is on the stand and she says, I want to be an actual daughter, not just some kid staying in your house. Isn't it funny how we can become strangers standing in God's house? Verse 17 says, live no longer as the Gentiles do, for they are hopelessly confused. You see, Gentiles were strangers in God's house. God was a stranger to them. Literally, the word Gentile means nations. So Paul is saying, live no longer as the nations do. Live no longer as the world does. Because people who live accordingly to the world, they don't know God. Let me give you an example. A prisoner's day is full of routine. Everything for them is scheduled. From the time that they wake up to the meals that they eat, even their bathroom breaks are scheduled. From day to day, prisoners just go through the motions. Isn't it ironic that our spiritual lives can be just like that? We are prisoners when we are just going through the motions. We are not free. When our Christianity is based solely on a few hours on Sunday, and then the rest of the week, we are no different from the people in our school, in our work, in our nation, in our world, then we are just going through the motions. We end up confusing a close proximity to God for an actual relationship with God. We want to feel like sons and daughters to God, but we are not living our lives that way. God doesn't want us to feel like strangers in his house. He wants us to be his children, to know him, to not go through the motions. He wants to give us everything he can. He wants us to be free. He calls us to be his actual child, not some kid staying in his house. And that's the difference between going through the motions and having a relationship with the Lord. Paul tells us in verse 22 that we can be free by throwing out our old sinful nature and our former way of life. Paul doesn't say to get rid of it or to put it on the side. He says to throw it away and be free. The girl in the video is saying the same exact thing. She wants out of that prison. She wants to be an actual daughter to her parents. She wants to get rid of the way she wants and be out of that prison. A wolf is going to come by, guided by his senses of smell, and find this blood circle. and he will begin licking it over and over, enjoying every single taste of it. And sooner or later, he cannot feel anything because his tongue is so cold. It's numb. But his taste for the blood keeps growing, and he's not getting as much as he wants. You see, popsicles are made for slow eating. But finally, his licking exposes the blade of the knife, and it cuts into his tongue again and again. But he can no longer feel anything. But now he notices blood is flowing and it's more plentiful than ever, so he increases his efforts because he knows blood is food. But soon he notices something. He is getting weaker, not stronger. Since he knows blood is food, he keeps increasing his efforts, but sooner or later he gets to his last lick and he dies next to the fully exposed knife. Friends, this is a picture of sin. Like when we get a personal gratification on doing something and we keep doing it and we keep doing it because we feel like we're living but we are actually dying. Like the wolves, we have no power over sin in our lives. Like the wolves, we are enticed to sin and can't stop even if we wanted to. But thankfully, we have this doorway to freedom, and that is admitting we are wrong. Amen. That is saying goodbye to something that has served us well and creating room for God to lead us. Earlier tonight, we all received the stamp, and it says E514, and it stands for our Bible verse for this weekend. My question to you all is, are you going to let the stamp stain you, or are you going to let it move you? In a prison, you have no name, just a number. But isn't it amazing? Isn't it amazing that we can go to our Father and He will know our names and not keep account of the sins we have done? We are always going to remain in this prison if we keep that sin in our life. If we don't have a relationship with the Lord, we are never going to be free. Jesus died on the cross, but then he came back to life again. Do you believe that? That Jesus died on the cross and then he came back to life again. The same exact power that brought Jesus back to life is available to us all tonight to break the power of sin in our life. I don't know everyone's story in here tonight, but I do know that maybe some of us have been running and some of us have been the strangers standing in God's house. We have all been in our own prison. Nobody in this room is too good to have Satan working in their life. But nobody in this room is not good enough to have God working in theirs. Tonight is an opportunity to break out of this prison because it's time to wake up. God wants to break the power of sin in your lives.